Welcome back to Demystify Sci. I'm Shilo.
I'm Anastasia.
We are here to discuss one of the more disturbing topics that we've broached on this show, and that is the specific role of particular environmental toxins in various famous diseases, infectious diseases that have occurred over the past 100 years or so. And this is a really sensitive topic. In fact, it's so sensitive that we're not even going to publish the back half of this conversation on YouTube because we're talking about things we're not allowed to talk about, but we think they're really important. Now,
So the rest of that conversation is going to be on Spotify.
yeah, more on that in a second, but our guide for this journey is Forrest Maready. He is an independent investigator and an author of many, many books. I recommend that you read all of them. He's a fantastic writer. They're really, really gripping, almost story-like investigations of the past. And our centerpiece for the YouTube version of this is going to circle around polio, and specifically the environmental toxins that could contribute to the virulence of the virus responsible or the virus associated with the polio infection. And it's really eye-opening. I don't really feel the need to give away the details of it right this second, but I think you're going to love it. If you want to hang around after that, like Nastia said, you're going to have to go over to another platform. Remember, this podcast is at every podcast store, so you can go listen to it anywhere. We thought about just saving that and giving it as a treat to our patrons originally. That was kind of the plan, but it turned out to be such an important discussion, and I think it has such wide-ranging impacts on our civilization. I think that the consequences of forest theory, if true, could be equally as devastating as any of the other things that people are freaking out about today. AI, global warming, whatever you want. This is some serious stuff, and everybody should hear it. So at the break, come on over to one of the other podcast platforms, and we'll catch up with the backside of that. Hopefully, someday YouTube will become a free platform where we can talk about things freely, but not today.
I think this is the weirdest introduction that we've ever done where we can't actually talk about the ideas that are in the episode, but I really recommend going over to Spotify or to wherever you listen to podcasts because the full arc of Forrest's story really depends on getting a handle both on polio and what we talk about in the back half of the show. And like Shilo said, I don't necessarily know if Forrest's theory is 100% correct. And we push back on him in places where we think that there's other things that might be contributing to the story that he's telling. But it's hard to look at the data that he's presenting and not recognize that many of the diseases that we take to be purely environmental in the sense of there's something in nature that we encounter and it causes disease.
One bug, one pathology.
Might actually be a much more complex story of the interaction of industrial society with our bodies, with our health, with our mental abilities, and physical just the same. And so,
paired to our religious faith in our medical institutions. So remember, like I said, we're not going to hide the back half of that conversation on Patreon because it's too important, but we are entirely supported by patrons. And as tempting as it is to make you become a patron to hear that, I don't want to do that. But I would really love to see you over at patreon.com/demystifysci because that's how we keep this project going. And you can shave off the tiniest piece of your paycheck and, look at our list of patrons. There's a lot of you who are supporting this, and that's incredible. It's really the way of the Renaissance, being supported by the people who value what you're doing directly. We're not selling anything. We're not, sponsored by stuff we don't care about. We're just supported by people who care about these investigations. So consider coming over to patreon.com/demystifysci. And if you don't have any money, cool. Share the podcast with somebody. Get involved in our Discord or our Facebook. Talk about it. Grab a t-shirt. We're selling them at cost down below so you can rep Demystify Sci around your town. There's a lot of ways that you can contribute to growing this project and helping us get bigger reach with it that don't cost anything.
and on the topic of if you don't have any cash, we are actually looking to hire somebody who can help us book shows. We spend a tremendous amount of our time scouring the internet trying to find people that can bring a really interesting story to the table, And that's time that pulls us away from being able to do the kind of research that's really important for conducting an interview that's to the level that we want to do. And so we're looking for somebody who can help us do that. If you think that you might be that person, reach out. We're at demystifysci@gmail.com, and you can send us an email and we can talk about what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, we could just go to an agency and try to find somebody, but it'd be really cool to find somebody who cared about what we were doing and understood the kind of guests that we actually want to have on this show. So if you know somebody, or if you are that somebody, please do reach out.
And in the meantime, enjoy the conversation with Forrest and Maready.
The scientific revolution starts now.
The Demystified Sci Podcast.
Let us see in the dark.
Yeah, the smallpox story itself is really bizarre. I just was reading about it a little bit on Wikipedia the other day, and even the story of the producing the inoculation for it is very bizarre, and how they end up using this killed virus, and somehow they're not really sure where that virus came from. Right? It's not actually the smallpox virus that they use. There's this line in Wikipedia that's very disconcerting.
But the vaccinia virus is of unknown provenance.
Yeah, so I guess a Jenner just happened upon it, or I don't know. It's very strange.
Well, again, where's your Overton window? I can answer it in the sort of polite way, which is we don't really know what's in the smallpox vaccine. If it had any effectiveness at all, it was essentially through pure inoculation, which was you were giving someone the smallpox virus, at a time of optimum health in hopes that they'd survive it. Now, the notion that there was this other virus, the cowpox virus, which would act as a proxy for the real deal, the smallpox virus, and safely give them immunity, that's a real stretch. Of course, that's the lore. That's what we're told, but we've never encountered that again in nature. We've never used animal virus A as a proxy for animal virus B, especially in terms of immunity. So that would have been the one time that it's ever happened in history. And my guess, as a lot of other people's guess, is they were basically inoculating them with smallpox. That's the vaccine was an inoculation. It wasn't a vaccine, really. It was actually just giving them the virus itself.
So when they switched over to this, what are they called, a homolog virus or something, the vaccinia one, do you suspect that that's really not from a different
the thing is branched.
So
they grew this in the bellies of calves. They grew it in goats and rabbits and every other animal on the planet. There is no tracking. There's no way of tracking all the variants that this virus has become over time. And in fact, there are people who will argue that the monkeypox virus that you see sort of popping up in the last few years is actually smallpox. It's the same thing. It's just sort of mutated in a different way. But I don't know. You know this. These are difficult to study, especially viruses. They are very difficult to study and to, what's the word? To give them some nomenclature that sort of holds up, a lexicon that describes them cleanly. It's not as easy as people think.
Well, because on one hand, you want to treat them like organisms, but on the other hand, they're the product of organisms, and it's very difficult to untangle that at some state.
Yeah. Yeah, the smallpox vaccine, in my opinion, from what I've studied, was very dangerous. And it was very dangerous because they were purposefully injecting you with a dangerous virus, something your body could normally handle without dramatic effect. And I've got some research that I'm working on. This is another book I'm just got banging around in my head, but my theory is the smallpox virus was essentially a product of bed bugs, and it was a product of people starting to sleep in beds and mattresses, and you can essentially track the rise of smallpox infections in the industrial era as improved, I'm calling it improved bedding, started to come around, and bed bugs became a real problem.
And they were the vector? Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. It's you've seen it's a bifurcated needle. This is the way they don't inject you like a subdermal injection. It's literally a scratch under the skin. This is exactly what a bed bug would do, right? It's not this deep injection. If they give you a deep injection, it doesn't work. They have to just barely scratch the surface to generate the infection. So that's a clue to me that like the natural means of infection isn't like somebody kissing someone or coughing on them. It's got to be that like just under the surface scratch. Because now I don't know if this is true, obviously, but I suspect that it's true.
How did you get interested in these medical questions? Because your background is more nonfiction or more fiction.
My background is I was a pipe organ major and studied Tolkien in college. The natural route to scientific exploration. No, I'm a curious person, just like you guys. That's the makings of someone who's going to dig a little deeper than what the surface level story is, right? You've got a good BS detector. Sometimes things just don't ring true to you, and you've also got insatiable curiosity. And you say, you know what? I can't go to far off lands and explore these unseen mountains and waterfalls. I certainly can't go to space. This is sort of, one of the final frontiers, if I could say that, is like, I want to know the truth about these things. I think there's something here that doesn't ring true to me, and I want to figure it out. And so with that insatiable curiosity, I started with my wife who, had some autoimmune issues in our marriage and some real struggles with doctors not being able to help her. It was sort of a partnership between me and her where we would knock our heads together and just say, wait a minute, this isn't right. Something doesn't resonate with us on this. And she would do a lot of research. I did a lot of research, and we just eventually started making some connections that we thought, hey, maybe there's something here. And I'm just enough of an ignoramus that I started writing books about it. But that's essentially, a lot of these stories are personal. You don't get there through nothing. You get there through some personal vendetta of anger at allopathic medicine, failing you, at least in a particular case. Where we realized the doctors didn't have all the answers. They certainly acted like they did, but we could tell they didn't.
And I feel like that's a theme that runs through all of your books, because what you do is you mix a historical narrative with the scientific narrative. And the historical narrative involves doctors doing a lot of really weird and horrible treatments in order to cure people. Like,
we were at the river the other day, and we decided to just sit down in the middle of the river, and we actually, as we got up from the rocks, I realized this like seaweed was really hard to scrape off. I got some seaweed on my arms, but then I slowly realized the seaweed was moving, and then I slowly realized it was like 1,000 leeches. Oh. And my next thought after that, after I got the leeches off of me, it was, they used to do this to people to suck the bad humors out of them or whatever. But that wasn't that long ago, right? It wasn't that long ago. I guess there's still a use for them, but
you probably felt like $1 million the next day, right? Yeah. It's funny. A lot of times there is a kernel of truth to some of these horrific practices that medicine did, and bloodletting is what you're alluding to. This is a thing where they would drain blood. They had these things called scarificators, which would purposefully lacerate your skin, with multiple blades, and they would drain your blood. Is there some actual vindication to that? There might be. There might have actually been value to that, in that your body is forced to create new blood cells. Maybe your immune system is triggered in such a way that there is healing. I don't know. I mean, we do use leeches nowadays to encourage, whenever there's a reattached finger. I'm sure you've heard this story. They'll put leeches on the downstream side of the amputated finger, and it will suck blood and encourage blood to come through and form new connections. So in that way, leeches are a legitimate medicinal treatment, but as a way of, draining your humors. This is sort of the old school medical terminology where, you had some bad humors in your blood and we want to get them out, so we'll put some leeches on you. But
I think what's profound to me is that it wasn't that long ago, right? Like people, it's so easy we have such a short memory, right? We wake up into this world, at least I did in the mid 80s, and it's like, everything's been figured out. Modern medicine, modern intellects are so much more powerful than in the past. These people were barbarians, but we're not anymore. And it's very convincing up front. But when you stop and think about it, you're like, you know what? That was only a couple generations ago that people were doing all sorts of unbelievable stuff. Giving people like lead poisons and arsenic poisons and just crazy stuff that we would laugh at today, but it wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, and in fact, if history teaches you anything, it should teach you that right now you and I are doing things to our body that we will look at in horror in 50 years that we did. The current generation, we always think we know best. We know more than they did, and we always conflate wisdom and intelligence, and unfortunately, they're very different. And we may have more intelligence than we did people from 50 years ago, but we have no more wisdom than they did. And it's, they were doing things. I was born in 71, I'm 53, and I saw something the other day that said 1918, the end of World War I, was the same distance from 1971 as we are from 1971 now. That was a real humbling statement to your point that, these things weren't that long ago. I mean, we were giving children medicinal metals. We were purposefully injecting them with mercury. We were purposefully having them inject arsenic to purge their bowels if they were sick. I mean, these were barbaric practices that weren't done that long ago. And as I'm sort of hinting at, I'm guessing there are practices we do right now to ourselves, to our children, that hopefully within a few decades we will sort of come around on and go, you know what, that really was a horrible idea.
I mean, the most obvious one that's completely uncontroversial at this point is the food pyramid, right?
Yeah.
It's like when I was a kid.
Look at me. I'm living proof of the food pyramid being wrong.
I mean, I grew up on, TV dinners and Stofers and all of that, right? And
with grains at the top or at the bottom, eat
cereal
as much as you want of grains. This is the foundation of good health. That's what the food pyramid said.
And it took me almost 40 years to figure that out, and when I figured it out, it actually kind of changed my life. I don't have any of the same problems I had before.
That's awesome.
But
doctors smoked and recommended certain cigarettes. The food pyramid, of course. More recently, there's been the blood pressure crisis, where the baseline blood pressure level has changed in correlation with the medicine that's available to lower your blood pressure. The cholesterol level recommendations have changed in correlation with the medicines available to lower your cholesterol. It's really amazing how frequently these things sort of go hand in hand. Now, you might say, well, high blood pressure was a problem. That's why they did medicine. But I'm a skeptic, and I definitely think, the cholesterol levels that are recommended now are artificially low. And you've got all kinds of seniors taking all kinds of medicine that they don't really need, but they've been scared into believing that if they don't get their cholesterol level under, whatever, 170 or 140 or whatever it is, then they need medicine for it. And if their blood pressure is over, 120 over 80, which is just insane. Most people don't have blood pressure that low, but they'll tell you have to be on medicine if your blood pressure is not that low. And a lot of people making a lot of money off of that. And, health disease is still number 2 killer in the world behind cancer, I believe. So just ahead of medical mistakes. So I don't know. Call me a skeptic. But
I think last time I looked into it,
fine.
Yeah. Last time I looked into it, there was no long-term survival benefits from these blood pressure meds. I don't know if it's still holding strong. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and
they do lower your blood pressure, but it doesn't seem to matter.
It's the body is remarkably resilient at dealing with adversity. This is in terms of microbiological assault. This is true with environmental assault. This is true with just physical hardship. The body is very good at healing if we can just get out of the way. Now, I'm not saying medicine is unnecessary. I'm not saying surgery is unnecessary. Certainly these things are necessary. But The body is better at healing than most people give it credit for. We just don't like to suffer. We want a magic pill to make the pain go away as fast as possible. But
yeah, exercise is a great example of that. I mean, you got to really tear your body up to get strong. It's kind of funny that you would think it wouldn't apply to everything else.
Yeah, it's immunologically, we think we can get immunity to things for free, essentially at the end of a needle, and unfortunately, it often doesn't work that way. You have to earn it. Just like at the gym, you have to earn your muscles at the gym. You have to earn your cardio at the gym. You have to earn your immunity. You just can't get it for free as easily as people think. There's a cost to everything. I mean, I've said this a million times. Everything has a cost. You may hide it through, spreading it out thinner so that the cost, comes in spurts over the next 10 years. But, eventually the bill will come due. And unfortunately, it's oftentimes much more expensive than if you'd have just taken your bill at face value and paid it.
Do you have a sense of how doctors became such a powerful force in society? Has this always been the case, where it's someone who has the passport to curing you, and so people turn to them, or is this something?
It's almost the last noble title of nobility in our society is the doctor, right? It's like, I think people in the past would have had titles like Sir.
Esquire.
Yeah, Sir Maready, but now it's doctor, right? And then it has this kind of like overtone to it of elevation.
Yeah, I mean, my take on that is that came about through the polio story. That was essentially the beginning of modern medicine lore, is what I call it, in that the doctors saved us. And before then, doctors were held in very low regard. Hospitals even worse. Hospitals were where the poor people went to go die. If you had any money at all, the doctor would come visit you. You wouldn't dare go to a hospital. That was for poor people. So the hospital was very, very low respect for that. And then doctors themselves were thought of very poorly. Surgeons, even worse. Surgeons were barbarians who killed people routinely. Doctors might hurt you and harm your child through trying to help them, but surgeons would just kill them. This is, because they had no knowledge of infection. They didn't believe in washing their hands. And this whole, I'm sure you've heard this story.
The Semmelweis story?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So...
relevant to this, there was, we were talking to Shilo's mom about this, and she kind of offhandedly mentioned that I think that it was her grandmother who had really bad arthritis. And the way that the doctors...
cripplingly bad arthritis.
And the way that the doctors treated it was by pulling all of her teeth.
No.
This is what, like back in the 40s or something?
Yeah.
50s?
Now, I thought you were going to say bee stings. Now, there is some very interesting teeth disease connections that we're just now starting to understand, but I don't think pulling all your teeth... I'm assuming it didn't work? Is that where we're going with this?
Yeah, it did not work. But it gave her a lifelong fear of doctors. Yeah. Understandably so.
Yeah.
I think I just got a lifelong fear of doctors from that story.
Yeah, I mean, if you remember the tonsillectomy component, if you read the Moth and the Iron Lung, there was a period where doctors, if you sneezed funny, they would say your tonsils needed to come out. And they did it routinely, in bulk. I mean, they would just crank through entire schools looking for any sign to take their tonsils out. It was as if, nature had made a mistake in this design of your body. And it's just the ignorance is really stunning.
That was still going on when I remember whispers of that when I was a kid. I think it got phased out around then, but I remember at least it was like a joke in popular culture about people having had their tonsils out, and it was an undercurrent. It seemed very common.
Yeah, it was common, and I would argue the current manifestation of that same ideology is wisdom teeth. Your wisdom teeth, they have to come out. They're growing in these weird angles, and in 30 years, they're going to cause you a lot of pain. Well, it's like, okay, the body, we humans have been growing wisdom teeth for a very long time without dentists or doctors, and I don't recall a lot of people dying from it, and these things, they change, they move, and in fact, they encourage growth in your jaw. There's a lot of people that, if you've seen the mewing craze, these people are like chewing fancy gum to like increase their jawline, because there's a lot of people in their profile, they have a very weak jaw. And, maybe it's because their parents didn't give them any food to chew. We give them all Pop-Tarts and SpaghettiOs, and they never actually had to chew food. Or, there's a couple of reasons maybe why people's jawlines are undeveloped, but a part of it maybe you're pulling out their wisdom teeth, and that's something that is encouraging the growth of their jaw to allow for more room. So, currently, we yank wisdom teeth out as if they're some horrible, horrible aberration of the human body, and I'm guessing there's a reason. There's a reason.
I imagine people their molars were falling out more often in the past. I mean, people's
And
molars
this is like
still fall
a backup
out.
set.
I mean,
Like shark
it's a
teeth.
reasonable hypothesis, right? I mean,
No.
I know just of the friends that I have, people are starting to get root canals, which is essentially having a tooth die, and it doesn't seem that uncommon that by middle age you might have lost a molar or two.
Yeah. I don't know if you ever follow Weston Price Foundation, but they have a lot of really interesting literature on dental health and food and diet. And the whole foundation started when he was, I don't know if he was doing like anthropological study, but he was, amongst some very remote tribes in Africa, and noticed their dental health was amazing. And he was always trying to understand why. And that's essentially where Weston Price Foundation got its start. Now it's more of a sort of holistic natural health umbrella, over the whole thing, but it started with dental health.
What were the secrets he learned?
I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
I've spoken at their conference once or twice, but I don't know. I haven't read the literature.
Well, I think it's chewing things generally.
I totally agree. I think this bland diet with, where everything is processed. So like bologna instead of like meat off the bone, where you don't have to work for it. I think there's a lot to be said for like literally just getting food already liquefied and not having to earn it in some way.
Yeah.
I'm guilty. I'm guilty in that. I definitely.
It's hard to avoid it. Yeah, it's hard to avoid it
No.
to some extent, even if you cook at home. Tasty things, especially if you're cooking for other people, it's like tasty things are easy to eat.
Did I tell you that Discovery Health Channel did a documentary about me? Did I mention that?
You did mention that, but I have
Oh,
no memory of the specifics.
Yeah, it was. They followed me for a year because I was the pickiest eater they had ever met.
Oh, that's right.
I had been working with them on some other shows because I used to work in TV and film as an editor and whatnot, and I was working on some of their shows, and we'd go eat lunch, and they would notice that I ate like a 3-year-old, and eventually they figured out they wanted to do a show about me. So yeah, I can't talk about food without a little bit of a smirk, because anyone who knows me will know that I'm a weirdo.
Is that based on intuition or taste, or is this you know too much?
It's sort of a spectrumy sensory processing disorder where I'm super, super sensitive to taste and texture, where it's like, things freak me out unnaturally. Like I know that it's strange. I know that it doesn't make any sense. And
What's an example?
Tea.
Tea,
Coffee, beer,
Really?
wine,
Wow.
any drink that any normal person on the planet would enjoy and should enjoy, it's out for me. It's horrible. It's like the taste of it is overwhelming. Like with coffee, tea, beer, wine, the taste is overwhelming. The alcohol content in beer and wine particularly are just like so incredibly intense to me. I can't take it. I've never had coffee in my life. Unless I tried it as a kid, I haven't had it.
Wow.
I definitely have a clear memory of never having it, like since high school. Maybe before that I tried it, but I definitely haven't had any coffee Just the smell of it alone. So yeah, that's sensory processing. The textures of things like corn on the cob. Yeah, like I could eat it and chew it and it feels good. But if you like took it off the cob into a bowl and I had to eat it with a spoon, I would gag. It doesn't make any sense. It's total. I'm totally messed up in that way. But
If I remember from the book, you were trying to change that.
yeah, like the OCD stuff. You mean where I through the show that the documentary I was just talking about? They
Well,
put
I
me
think
on.
that you remember you mentioned it in the book that there was some intervention that you tried that seemed like it helped for a little bit.
Well, one thing that definitely helped was an SSRI. They put me on Celexa, and that was amazing. I was like Superman. I went to Vancouver and ate sashimi, which is like the super raw stuff. It's beyond sushi. I was absolute Superman when it came to food. I couldn't believe it. It was amazing. The side effects were way too horrible. I couldn't tolerate it. But wow, I was amazing on that, which confirmed to me that it is sort of like an anxiety. It's like OCD. It's an anxiety coping mechanism to control what I eat and to not have anything. Now, I do believe I have, I'm a super taster. Some people will argue whether that's a valid diagnosis or not. But I definitely, I'm sure you've met people that have hearing hyperacuity, where the hyperacusis, where they can't, like, they hear things so over the top. It's like they put on earmuffs. You've seen autistic kids where they'll put on earmuffs because they hear everything and they can't tune things out, and it will literally drive them crazy. I'm kind of that way with taste. So
we got
I
a
eat,
super
it's like,
taster kit at some point and tried it out with the family.
was it the thing with the circle to measure the
it was
what
like
are they
whether you
called?
could
The
taste
little
certain
bumps?
things or not. Like only certain people had the ability
they make
to.
a kit where yeah.
I can send you a link to it. You can just buy it on Amazon.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like
Oh, I'd
60
love to.
strips. It's like $10.
Oh, I would love this. Yeah, have you seen, there is a certain gene they've narrowed down for cauliflower or certain types of bitter vegetables that some people have. And I've definitely, I could guarantee I have that. Like maybe the tannins of wine, maybe like that's why red wine tastes is so difficult for me to enjoy because of the tannins. But there's some genetic marker they found, or cruciferous vegetables taste very horrible.
Yeah, I think cilantro too has a gene where it tastes
really?
like sewage to some people.
I can relate with sometimes I can hear those like power adapter charger things. They have this like really
you can hear
high.
them?
Yeah, I think it's honestly close to 20 kilohertz. It's really, really high pitched, but it just gives me this stressful feeling. And I've discovered, because I do a lot of music recording, and I've discovered sometimes in my studio, like I go in the room and I feel kind of like, it's not like a audio perception. It's just I can sense there's some tension in the room. And as soon as I unplug the right one, it's like, oh, okay. It's kind of wild.
I used to think that was superstition, and I don't anymore. I totally believe it. And one of the things that convinced me a long time ago, I was working on a movie called The Jackal. It was a horrible movie with Richard Gere and Bruce Willis, Sidney Poitier. We were filming at a rest stop and on a highway. And it was just happened to be at this point where there were enormous power lines, the ones that run through the wild country, they're way up high. And I would walk under it and I literally could feel my nose tickle. And I went to an electrician and I said, is it strange? I don't know if it's just me, but I swear I can feel my sinuses tickle when I kind of get under this thing. He said, no, well, let me show you. And I don't know if you've ever seen the contactless voltage tester. They have these little things. You don't actually have to touch a bare metal. He held it up in the air and the thing lit up, just like there was so much RF coming off those cables that it would light up his meter just by holding it in the air. And so that was like the beginning of me saying, you know what, we have sight and touch and hearing, and these, I think there's something to the whole RF detection. I know there's probably some hokiness in there, some true hokiness. I'll give you that. But there's also some truth to it. We have we declined the smart meter at our house. The power meter is adjacent to our bedroom, and because of my experience 20 years ago with the movie, I said I don't want the smart meter. We've already got enough RF in here. I don't want it. So we have to pay an extra $15 a month to have somebody come and manually read our meter. sure they think
It's a really difficult phenomenon to untangle. I tried to do some research on it a few years back, really went down the rabbit hole, and it's just really difficult to untangle because, of course, the people who live under power lines tend to be lower income. They have other problems and stresses, and it's just really hard to single it out. But
I remember reading about, I was digging into it and discovered that electricians have some of the highest suicide rates of any profession.
Really?
Yeah, and the article that I was reading was like, it might be because it's such a solo profession and they're just lonely. It's like, I don't know if that's a good reason or not.
I don't know. Well, there is, I found an article where there's, they call them piezo buzzers. I don't know if they're like these little, they're used in electronic equipment to make a buzzing or a beeping like in an alarm clock. They could manipulate bacterial growth by using that, just the frequencies coming off that. And it's kind of like the Rife machine. If you've, Raymond Rife, if you've ever looked into that, this is kind of like being able to kill certain microbes with certain frequencies of electricity or the RF coming off the electricity. I mean, this is an actual thing. Whether the device works or not to cure cancer, we don't know. It's tough to say whether you can target the right cells and not kill good ones. But there's something to it. It is, like you said, it's hard to separate the wheat from the chaff because there's a lot of hokiness out there, but there's also something to it. So I get, I just read an article about this Bitcoin farm. These people in Texas were getting sick from it, and there's something there.
I was just going to bring that up, but it's because the article is crazy. People have fluid leaking from their ears.
oh my
They're
God.
vomiting. They're just going through all of these insane health problems. People are having heart attacks. And the explanation that's given is that it's just really loud. It's like 90
it's noise,
decibels.
pure noise. Noise can certainly cause psychological problems. I know that like the fans, like even offshore fans, like the wind generation, I know there are people that have had some real serious problems from those. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's something to it. I wish I understood it better. And as soon as you start talking about it, you really you start thinking, am I really saying this? Because I'm sure I sound like a kook saying this stuff. But
I don't think so, because we've talked to people that are, UCLA professors studying biology, and they're like, hey, it's really weird that if you take embryos and you put them in a Faraday cage, they come out mutated. And so they think that that's just the magnetic field of the Earth that's helping embryos pattern. And so logically, if the magnetic field of the Earth, when removed, is causing massive defects in development,
that's wild.
An excess of an electromagnetic field seems plausibly...
At least disorienting at the very least. And you got to keep in mind there's probably a huge spectrum of sensitivities to these things, just like anything else. It's like...
Yeah. Now, have you guys, I have a feeling you're familiar with Liam Sheff?
Mm-mm.
Have you ever, he died a few years ago because he had ringing in his ears and couldn't get rid of it. And I think he ended up taking his own life. But you guys would love him. I wish he were still alive. It's Liam Sheff, Scheff. He's still got videos on YouTube. You would love this guy. I can just tell you guys are kindred spirits. I wish that you could have him on because he's very interesting, and he likes to pursue the same things we're talking about and look into them. And he had a lot of interesting thoughts about lightning and weather phenomenon and electromagnetic field on health and things like that. He's super, super smart guy. So
check him out.
Yeah, take a look when you get a sec. All right. So now is this was still fluff or are we just kind of warming up? Did we forget to introduce? Should you just start the show like that and then say an introduction?
Yeah, we just kind of let it roll. We'll actually append an introduction after we're all done here.
Good.
Yeah, we'll set everybody on course. But
we're not making this good for editing.
No, it's okay.
No,
we begin in media res, and so we go back and we explain who you are, what your background is, what the ideas are, give a little bit of context, and then after the introduction, it basically starts
No, this is great. This is what our audience loves, is just to hang out with the guests. They want to feel like they're at a party with some people that are friends, having interesting stuff.
Weirdest party you've ever been to.
Yeah, not for us. Every party we go to is kind of like this.
Story of my life. I always wonder why I didn't make friends.
Yeah, I always tell this story when I was in college. I just would catch myself at parties. Everybody's doing whatever they're doing, and I'm like, okay, so the thing about the Armenian genocide is... And
There's a meme about this. I know exactly. That's awesome. Yeah, you're my people. This is what my wife and I, this is how we bonded was, we just kind of crashed into each other, and then we realized, hey, we're the weirdos. Like, yeah, we're the weirdos. So, yeah, same thing.
And there's just...
We're the ones who always left the party early because the small talk it just didn't intellectually challenge us, and we wanted to have something more meaningful to talk about.
That's literally how Anastasia and I met, actually.
Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah, we ran into each other at this interview for grad school, and it was really funny because they shuttle you to this bar at the end of the interviews.
Oh, interesting.
And they take the old grad students, and you're supposed to mingle and stuff. And I don't really drink. I drink more now than I used to. I didn't drink at the time, so I was just like, I'll go for a second. And then somebody was like, you guys need to talk to each other. And then, we very quickly left the party and wandered around Manhattan talking about way too serious things.
That's
until
awesome.
dawn, yeah.
It's nice, isn't it? It's really nice when you find that person who's
And that's the cool thing about technology, this kind of technology, like to say something good about RF, like at least we can hang out with kindred spirits that are on the other side of the country. And that's been a really incredible blessing of having found this podcast and getting to meet people like you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So I feel the same way. It's it's not quite as I should say maybe I don't feel quite as strange as I always have. And more recently, in the last few years, I think there's a lot of people sort of Overton window shifting. Their minds are opening a little bit more, and I think you mentioned I was on a podcast recently, it's sort of a famous podcast, and I play a lot of tennis. And went to a match, and the previous match was ending, and a couple guys were walking over the court, and a guy came up to me and said, hey, so-and-so said you're on What's-His-Face's podcast. That's really awesome. I'm going to take a look. But he said it was really good. Now, 5 years ago, they would not have said that. They would have been like, woo, Forrest, you are really off the reservation with whatever you were saying there. And it's now, there's a little bit of recognition, and it was funny, I don't know. I don't want to lose my edge, as a tennis player. This is Novak Djokovic. He's always been the villain. And I think he revels in that, and he plays better when he is. I don't want the world to start liking him. I want them to continue to not like him because I think he plays better that way. So I don't want to be loved. I was born to be hated. I always tell that to my wife. So
yeah, it's cool being a weirdo. Yeah.
It's, I had in high school, if I may, I had a little Honda Civic, like a sedan with a little trunk. And I got a personalized license plate that said, I love Bach, L-U-V, because you can only have 8 characters in North Carolina, L-U-V Bach. And I got the cardboard cutout of a Beethoven bust from the record store. And I cut out the eye. I put 2 red bulbs where his eyes were and hooked them up to the taillights. So whenever you would brake, like his eyes, people thought it was Bach. And then I put bottle rocket launchers and wired this thing. I was just a real nut job. So yeah, I've come a long way.
Were they functional bottle rocket launchers?
Once they were such a pain to reload. They use these things. If you've ever messed with model rocketry, they have these little things called solar igniters that you put in the engine, and if you apply battery to it, it like sparks, and that's what lights the engine. I had to use those, and they're not reusable, so the whole thing was just a gag that we just did one time. But when I sold the car, I had 8 buttons that I had drilled like right behind the stick shift and the plastic, like the transmission hump. And the guy was like, what are those buttons for? And I was like, I don't know, like the radio, I think, or something. Nowadays I would have bragged about it. And I said, those are bottle rocket launchers and you just need to reload them and they work. And anyway, yeah.
Did these launchers shoot forward, like to the car in front of you?
Well, they went, the whole thing was so jerry-rigged. They went. There was no way.
I can't tell you the number of times I've wished I had a missile launcher on my car before, honestly.
Yeah. I had a lot of projects that were poorly executed. They were, grandly thought of, but poorly executed. But at least I did it. That's maybe been part of my life's success is at least I tried them. I actually tried them. I've written a bunch of books, and a lot of people dream of writing books, and I'm just persistent enough. I just followed through and finished them. So I don't know. Yeah, I've got loads of projects.
Do you have an overarching theme to the projects?
Well, the books for sure, like we sort of talked about in the beginning, the books are, I want to know the truth about things. Obviously within medicine, I've done that, and I'm a Christian, and I have done a lot of digging in the Christian faith and discovered there were a lot of things I was told, or most Christians are told, and that's a similar journey. And I was like, wait a minute, this is not the story that I thought was true. This is much different than what I was told. So I'm constantly looking for that hidden truth. And some people would say, oh, you're just a contrarian. You just want to say the opposite of whatever everyone else is saying. And there's probably a bit of that that's true. But the projects, I created a way to solve the Rubik's Cube, a way to teach people. Where is it? I'm not going to be able to find it. But it was essentially a paint by numbers. It was a way to make the cube more easy to understand, so that the very first step, which is the hardest step, you would only see just the 5 or 6 panels that you needed to work on. And then once you got that part solved, you could peel a few other stickers off. It was kind of like a paint by numbers thing. What was that? Was there a theme to that? I don't know. Is
there a single method for solving the Rubik's Cube, or are there multiple roads to
There's multiple. I was teaching the easiest one, which is the slowest way, but that's the way most people learn. The first way they learn is the way you can solve it in about a minute. But even that's tricky if you've never done it before. And for a lot of people, it was intimidating. And I had a guy, I think he was about 86, 87 years old, that sent me a picture of him holding up his solved Rubik's Cube. And he was like, look, I did this because of you. And that was really cool. But I'm just trying to think of some of my other projects. I don't know.
You got a pipe organ in the basement? Yeah, I was going to say.
You're musicians, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have this idea. Have you ever seen the one-man band?
Like the guy with
goofy with the cymbals between his knees, and he does this, and it plays a little kick drum in the back. I wanted to create sort of an automaton, like a machine that looked like Da Vinci had designed it. That was a drum machine for live players that they could essentially like pedal, but it would play intricate beats, and it could swing but swing, like you could adjust the swing by offsetting the gears.
I'd buy one.
I do like machines. I've wanted to build machines that were like the perfect golf swing that combine, let's say, sports but you can see all the machinery that goes into like articulating the shoulder turn and the hips turn and the arm. And there's like all these different rods and levers that go into moving this thing into the perfect swing. And I don't know. I've always liked intricate machines like that. But
do you keep a notebook with mirror script descriptions?
Oh yeah, like up here. Have you ever seen these Bien Fang notebooks? Do you know what they are?
I think so.
These are my favorite notebooks. They look like this. Can you see this?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
They're half ruled and half written on. So you've got half of it is lined for your notes, and then the other half is for drawing. And I've got, I don't know, like this. You can kind of see this is me just sort of thinking. Who knows what this is? It might be somebody's going to pause this video and reveal something embarrassing about me. But anyway, no, I like these books where you can kind of write and sketch at the same time. I did have a background as an artist, as a commercial artist. So this is me. I was coming up with this World Health Police. I was coming up with this.
That's really good.
This is Coburg, the vaccine. Anyway, I was essentially writing this script for a World Health Police, like a Simpsons Family Guy style spoof. But Yeah, I'm all over the place. Unfortunately, your viewers' respect for me is going down by the minute. I'm sure.
I don't know. You're in good company, man. I just got done reading the Da Vinci biography with all of his notebook reproductions
Oh
and
yeah.
stuff, and the
Now
notebook was central to his life.
I created a new way of typing called crosstab, um, which is you use just your thumbs and you type more with words than letters, and it works on any device, even like the steering wheel of your car. It works for the blind. Like I could actually, like imagine I could put my fingers on your shoulders and I could type. And it's sort of a universal way of communicating that works on any device in any language. And I ran it on Kickstarter, and it was an abysmal failure. It was like
Oh,
totally bombed. You can go on Kickstarter and look it up, Crosstap, CROSSTAP, and you'll see this video of me, you know, um, optimistic me.
were you
Showing the
partnered with a
world.
pro? Did you have somebody working on
No,
the
no, it's
code?
just
and
me.
stuff?
I
Yeah.
do software
Okay,
that's
okay.
my day job is I do software. So yeah, it was all me. But yeah, it just totally bombed. But I get people from China pretty frequently who found out about it. And I don't know if you know this, but typing in, um, is it called Pinyin?
Opinion, yeah.
It's very hard on a phone. You know, they essentially have to phonetically spell with an English language. They phonetically spell the first few letters of the word, and then they have a choice and they pick a character out of 10 that they were trying to go for. So it's very, very awkward to type on a smartphone in Mandarin or Cantonese. And so Crosstap would have allowed them essentially, because your brain is much smarter than people give it credit for. So, you know, there's millions of combinations of like, you know, you start here and you go up, that's a smiley face. You start here and you go down, that's a frown. And, you know, but words, elephant, whatever, you know, you memorize them. And so anybody could get on any device and type without looking. I was raised, my dad is a lifelong member of the Lions Club, which is a charity for the blind. And I was raised going to all these events, and I just thought everyone got blind at some point in their life because I was always around blind people. And the thing is with smartphones is blind people have a really hard time using them. You know,
Oh, yeah.
they're distinct. They have no distinctive surface. It's just pure glass. So this would allow people to be able to, blind people to be able to type on phones with no problem, or anyone to type on a phone without having to look at it, because currently we have to look at it. But
The steering wheel things is really interesting. That could be quite useful.
yeah, most steering wheels nowadays have if you know what a gaming D-pad is, it's like usually like a button in the center with a north, south, east, west. Yeah, that's all you need for Crosstap is just 5 per side, a center, and then a north, south, east, west. And anyway,
You
it's
could
total
combine
bomb.
driving and writing a novel. I like that.
Yes, yes. I think the DMV would really appreciate people keeping their eyes on their novel as they drive.
Well, one of those like
Anyway.
heads-up displays where it just kind of you can see
Yeah.
through it. I think you.
Yeah. Well, think about it. The smartphone is powerful enough to be a working computer for most everyone. It's just the keyboard that's the problem. The keyboard's too small, and you can't
Absolutely.
type efficiently on it. So if you had a way to type efficiently on this tiny form factor, then people would just stop getting laptops altogether. I mean, that's the only reason I have a laptop is because the keyboard's big enough for me to type fast.
Mm.
I mean, the phone's plenty powerful for most anything. It's just,
Especially if you could just HDMI it out or whatever,
Yeah.
USB it out to some screen if you wanted something bigger.
Maybe you're just
Yeah.
ahead of your time. Like another 10 years
I
from now.
am. Interestingly, I have this thing called the Amish 2.0, which is an attempt to go back to 1989. That's my goal. Is, you know, the original Amish sort of froze time at like the 1700s, early 1800s. I'm the Amish 2.0, which is I'm freezing time at 1989, which was essentially, you know, before the internet, before smartphones. That to me, the height of Bon Jovi. That's like life didn't get any better than then. That's a little bit of I'm joking a little bit, but yeah, we are trying to go back. We're trying to figure out. We're trying to connect with other families and figure out a way, ideally to go back before the internet. I would love to live a life with no internet. I would be ecstatic if I could do that. I don't know how I can right now, but I would love it. Whenever I see videos of like nostalgic videos of the 80s and 90s and people are at these parties or events and not a single smartphone in sight, it just looks so idyllic to me. But obviously, you know, there's a lot of good that comes out of the internet too. But
We'll have to come
Sorry.
banging on your door if you drop out of the internet.
yes,
You'll have to entertain more in-person visitors.
I would love that. I really would. I miss some of the hardship that not having the internet brought. But anyway, sorry.
Man, yeah, so I want to pick your brain about polio, but I do have one last
Sure.
question. Do you still play the pipe organ?
I do. Not actively. I was going to find my shoes to show you. You have to have special shoes to play the pipe
Really?
organ. Yeah, they have a raised heel because when you play the pedals, you have to. It's you need to be able to. It's hard to get your heel down low enough to play. So it essentially has a raised heel to allow you to heel toe. You can.
Man, I remember being a little kid in church, like watching the pipe organist and just dying to try it. Like I was just like, oh God, I just wish. And then I never got a chance, of course. But
Yep. That was
such a crazy instrument.
Yeah, it was the original rock and roll instrument. It was incredible, and it still is. It is. Some people, I've heard someone say, the thing about the pipe organ is the building is the instrument. It's like the entire building becomes the instrument. It's just so loud, and a lot of times the pipes are arranged in different places within the building, and the reverb, of course, in some of the cathedrals, it's absolute magic. If you've never gotten a chance to go to a pipe organ concert, like in an actual cathedral, definitely get in your car and go wherever you can.
Are you a Steve Winwood fan?
I listened to him when I was, younger. What's the tie-in to pipe organs?
Oh, he's just like the OG of the B3 organ, which isn't a pipe organ, but yeah.
Right. Yeah,
I don't know. I love Steve Winwood. He really got me into the organ when I was a kid.
Have you seen the guy that plays the B3 that's got the whammy bar on it?
No.
It's amazing. Is it a Rode? It's a Rode electric piano, I think.
Like a clav, I think.
Yeah, and he's got a giant whammy bar on it.
Yeah,
That he can bend the notes. Like it's got a wah pedal and he can play Jimi Hendrix and all these other things, but he can literally bend the notes on it. But B3s are very cool. I have a Hammond XB2, which is supposedly the worst Hammond B3 emulator ever made. I paid $1,000 for it when I got it because it had drawbars on it.
Yeah, we got the Nord
Leslie
version.
Yeah, they're so good nowadays. Everything's just so cheap and so good. It's just.
I just remember listening to rock and roll a lot and just. I didn't know. The day I figured out that the way the electric guitars sounded the way they did was because the organ was a profound day for me. Because it's always in the back of the mix, and it's like doing this gel thing with the guitars. It holds all the guitars together. But if you don't know what you're looking for, you probably don't even notice it. But it's in like every single rock and roll song that you've ever heard, probably since the late '60s onward. Anyways, I love organ.
I love playing Whiter Shade of Pale on the piano. It's not the same without the Leslie, turning it on and off with the speaker spinning up and down. But that's one of my favorite classic songs of all time is the Hammond on the Whiter Shade of Pale. Polio.
Yes.
Polio. Well, this ties into what we were talking about earlier, which is this weird confluence of environment and technology and health and people thinking that what they're doing is fine and then ultimately discovering that it very much is not. And then on top of that is this narrative that we fit, which is the story that we tell ourselves about how all of those things interacted to produce something like polio and then to produce the treatment of polio.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of stories out there where something bad happened and we've come up for an explanation for it that exonerates humankind from having anything to do with its cause. And unfortunately, you could look at war, and war is pretty easy because you can point to the bad guy, and it's the bad guy's fault. It wasn't our fault; it was the bad guy's fault. That's why there was war. And every history book always blames the other guy. Whatever country you grew up in, you're unlikely to read a history book that blames your own country for it. Until recently. German. Yeah, I think it's required by law there. But medically speaking, we're very slippery. We're very good at exonerating humankind from ever having caused any problems, whether purposefully or inadvertently. And it's through a lot of research, it's sort of my understanding that the polio story, which we were always told was the accidental or unexplainable ascendancy of a microbe which had formerly not really caused any problems at all. Suddenly, in the late 1800s, it suddenly started paralyzing children throughout the United States. And, of course, that story, the polio story, is really the story of the polio vaccine more than anything else. But if you're curious, you should say to yourself, wait a minute, where did the virus come from? Why did it start paralyzing children? It didn't do it before. Yeah, maybe, there's an example here and there throughout history, but what happened that made it innocuous, essentially, and then what made it turn into a monster? And that's sort of one of the very first things that I got really curious about, because there were portions of the polio story which just didn't make sense to me.
Can you give us a sense of scale for how much it blew up all of a sudden?
Yeah. Now, our modern recollection is it was a horrible killer, and people were dying in the streets every summer, and it was never that big of a deal back then. At its peak, I believe 1953 is considered the worst year in terms of deaths. I think that year there were maybe, don't quote me on this, it was around 3,000, maybe 2,600 people, according to, the CDC Mortality Weekly Report or whatever. You can go Google it and find PDFs from about every week for decades. I believe it was about 2,000 or 3,000. That same year, I think
2,000 or 3,000 a week, or that was 2,000 or 3,000?
No, I'm sorry, for the year, 2,000 or 3,000 for the entire year. I think tuberculosis killed 12,000. There were a couple of other diseases, probably summer diarrhea. This was a thing back then. Essentially, polio wasn't even in the top three. My recollection of it is it was number 4. Even that was its very worst year ever. Most of the other years, it wasn't nearly that bad. The thing that made it horrible was it was targeting children, and that was definitely terrifying to parents to see their children stricken down like that. And it happened during the summer. It had all these strange components to it. It was predictable. It was during the summer. It was children. It seemed to be those who were in the pool or had something to do with water. And it didn't affect the poor. It wasn't a disease of sanitation problem, which is what a lot of thinking at the time was, that disease was a issue of sanitation. This is where disease came from, was dirt and poor cleaning habits. And these were rich people's children that would come down with the paralysis. So it was very confusing in that way, in that it didn't follow the normal pattern of disease.
I think it's worth adding too that the paralysis is I'm just staring at Wikipedia right now, and it's something like 1% of infections lead to this paralysis. But I think when most people think of polio, especially people who didn't live through it, they think that you get polio and you're paralyzed, something like that.
Yeah. Now, this is always tricky when you talk about disease. You can view it through the lens of modernity, or as if you're, sort of interested in the history of it, you have to speak a little more specifically of things, because you want to speak about it in the ways that they understood it. And historically, the poliovirus, which is an enterovirus, which means it flourishes in your intestines, was an innocuous virus. You might imagine you have a little bit of a nauseated or upset stomach, and you think, did I eat something strange? Because I'm not feeling very good. And then it resolves itself within 6 hours or 8 hours, and you go, oh, okay, well, that's good. I guess that was it. That was in a good chance that was you getting a polio infection. It was literally a stomach bug that might resolve itself in 6 or 8 hours. And in fact, there are many, many enteroviruses. It's not just poliovirus. They didn't know that at the time, but there's all kinds of them. And what we also know now is I won't say they all, there are many of them that can paralyze you if they reach nervous tissue. If they get inside nervous tissue, they can paralyze. And that was a very, very odd thing for an enterovirus to actually get into nervous tissue. And that's one of the strange things about the polio virus and all these other viruses, Coxsackie virus, echovirus. I think there's one called D68 enterovirus. They don't get into your nervous tissue. They don't. The mucosal immune system, in your intestines and your nose, your throat, etc. They're very, very good at corralling these infections, and they don't sort of let them get past. And the real question of polio that no doctor or scientist or researcher seems interested in asking or finding out the answer to is, why did these formerly innocuous infections, why did they start paralyzing people? And it wasn't, again, I got to emphasize this, it wasn't just the polio virus infection. It was a ton of them that could do it. Now, this is Koch's postulates. If your listeners are science nerds, they'll know there is one single causative agent for every infection. I'm simplifying it, but that's what cursed them. They thought there was one microbe that must be causing this, and the reality is there were several. Now, the first that they were able to isolate and really start to study, they named that polio virus, and that's what they started trying to develop a vaccine for. But the reality is there were several other viruses at the time, even some bacterial infections, which could cause paralysis if they got past your immune system into your bloodstream. So it's a tricky question. Why did it paralyze some and not others? Well, I have my suspicions, which I obviously talk about in my moth book. But it wasn't pure luck. There was something else involved. My suspicion is there was an environmental toxin involved.
I think we should take a little break and then come back and say all the things we're not allowed to say on YouTube. So we're going to jump over to other platforms at this point.
All right. Yeah, sorry, YouTube. Maybe one day.
Yeah.
Come to the cool kids table again.
Some billionaire, please buy YouTube and end this madness.